This is an interview with Ray Eberhardt, Professor Emeritus of English with Elgin Community College, who lives in Woodstock, Illinois. Mr. Eberhardt taught English for the college from 1960 to 1985 during a time of great changes in the college's history. This interview is being conducted on March 9th, 2016 at Mr. Eberhardt's home. The interviewer is Polly Nash, and the interview is being recorded by Jack Weiss. Thank you so much for inviting us into your home.
Thank you for coming.
Can you tell us a little bit about where and when you were born?
Born in 1926, Racine, Wisconsin, where my parents lived, 3 blocks from Lake Michigan, which was very important to me as I grew up.
And what made that important?
Well, I learned how to swim by teaching myself rather than going. I had started at the YMCA, and that was a kind of a weird experience. All the kids were naked, and I didn't take to that. So I learned to swim just by swimming, which is the best way to learn, I think, a lot of things. So the lake, I just could not imagine living without that lake out there for boating, for just fishing. It was something that I couldn't imagine not having, Anyway, as far as my parents had lived in Racine for a number of years. Dad was in World War I and was in the field artillery in France, luckily behind the lines. After he married, decided he would major in electrical engineering. He was the first one from that family to go to college. That was a rare thing to do at that time, that period of time. The neighborhood was, I would say, very typical. It was half Catholic and half Lutheran in Racine. My grade school experience was probably not uncommon. I had most of my friends were Catholic, and we had other neighbor boys that were going to the same church as I, St. John's Lutheran. We got along very well with our religious differences. We seldom talked about them, and it turned out to be a really great neighborhood to be born in and live through. I went to high school, William Horlick High School. Horlick was a man who almost made Racine what it turned out to be. He had a lot of money, and he made a product that was well known throughout the city and through the country, malted milk. The one thing I wanted to say, and I reflected on this recently, was in my experience in the grade school, discipline was extremely important. And you had to learn how not to get hit with a ruler or with a rubber hose if you really behaved like a delinquent. It didn't take much to be considered delinquent. And I realized lately how we were influenced by that very strict discipline. The 2 subjects I like were English and chemistry. And so those are the 2 that I think I recall the most. A lot of our teachers, or the teachers we would have had, were in service. They volunteered. They wouldn't have had to. And I didn't realize either until lately how much we were formed by our anticipation of going into service. So I think while I was perhaps even a sophomore, maybe a junior, I signed up for the Air. I think then it was still called the Air Corps. Finally, I was called into basic training. That's where I went to Sheppard Field, Wichita Falls, Texas. That was my first experience living very far from home. And the war, this was, I think, that was still in March of 1945, I believe it would be 45. And the war was still on in both fronts, Japan and, of course, in Europe. And we thought it was going to be going on forever. So finally, we were tested, and it was determined that we would go to Denver, Colorado. So after Denver, we didn't know where we were going either. We got a train and we went to California. This was my first experience seeing the mountains, which was awe-inspiring. I remember waking up one morning, I think we're not in the Rockies and the Sierra Nevadas, and I'd never seen such beautiful country in my life. At any rate, we didn't know where we were going. We knew which ship we were going on, and we ended up 35 days later, 30 to 35 days later, in a ship that was, the rumor was that it had been a whaling boat. So it was slow, not the largest ship, but it had the traditional bunks inside. And I can recall, while most of the other guys were gambling, I was reading. Luckily, the military supplied lots of paperback books. This is where I first became acquainted with paperback books, I believe. Finally, we ended up outside Okinawa. And I thought, oh my God. The war had ended 2 months before that time. So all we saw was ruins. I think we went into Buckner Bay, and it was full of sunken ships. And from that time on, no one knew what to do with us. And I look back on that, it's just such a continuum of not knowing what was going to be next. All I knew after that military experience is I didn't want to be in a barracks again. Barracks life was not what I liked particularly. Well, before I went to college, at Madison, at the University of Wisconsin, I was enrolled in the Racine Extension Division of UW. And that was a very good experience.
Now, did you do that after the service?
That was after service,
okay, so you
yeah.
came back home
right.
to Racine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you studied?
Almost immediately went to college.
Okay.
And this gave me a chance to think a little bit about my future, what I would major in. And I took a lot of tests. I took the aptitude tests and interest tests and intelligence tests. I thought the program, the guidance programs are very good, considering there are only 2 men, I think, that were in charge of that for quite a number of students. I don't know, probably 900 or so students. And the instruction was very good. And one of my first experiences that I remember was being asked in English class to read my theme. I thought, I have to read this? And it was a comparison-contrast theme, and I'd chosen the subject of the point of view of the men that were striking G.I. Case, and the people of Racine and the company G.I. Case. And G.I. Case is a very conservative company. So conservative that I don't think they kept up with times, and finally they're taken over by a number of other companies. But I read it, and she said, that was excellent. So I had to make a decision. Would I stay at the Racine Extension and continue this kind of aimless life, or should I go away to college? So I decided to go to Madison, University of Wisconsin. And luckily I had notorious, well-known, very well-known specialist in Shakespeare. I just can't remember her name offhand, and I had her class. And she was my advisor. So I didn't really know what to take, and she saw to it I got into other courses besides English, but I had the best experience in an American Lit class I could ever imagine having. And my grades were all good, very good. So my buddy said, and he was an art student, he was in Brooklyn, he said, well, why don't you come to Brooklyn, and there's a new school of social research. And I'd heard about it, and today it's still excellent. You might want to take that. So I got there and got so intrigued with seeing dramas and foreign movies, as well as a lot of museums, and learning a lot about the city of New York, that I didn't go to school. And instead, my friend and I decided we were going to take a motorcycle trip to Maine. So
did it meet your expectations going up to northern
It
Maine?
was a wonderful place, just wonderful.
And did you stay there for a long time, or?
It was decided that we would go home by way of northern Wisconsin, and we camped out in a camp owned by a Racine neighbor of ours. Mm-hmm. I called him, and he said, sure, you can use the cabin, and we stayed there. That was pretty much the end of the trip, except all the way from northern Wisconsin down to Racine, Wisconsin.
So I know you finished college.
Then by that time I decided I have direction. What am I going to do if I don't have a degree? And I liked what I was doing, so I'll continue my major in English. So
that side trip was very instructive for
you.
you.
It really was.
And you graduated from the university?
Yeah, I graduated in 1951, except I needed a few more credits I'd missed in that one semester that I was out of Wisconsin.
So you went back to Racine to look for a job?
Yeah, and at that time, at that time my parents were building a home out in the country, and this was an opportunity for me to develop some skills. One thing about construction, you could always see what your results were. And I worked at that for almost a year, and then I said, it's time to go back and get myself prepared to teach. And to do that, I had to take a whole year of other courses.
So you took the courses to be able then to teach?
Right.
And when you finished those courses?
I waited a little bit while till I got placed in northern Wisconsin. This was really north central Wisconsin. I learned a lot about the public schools in that first year of teaching.
So you taught there how many years?
1 year.
1 year, okay.
And the second year was in another interesting town. It was in Viroqua, Wisconsin, which was primarily settled by Norwegians.
How do you spell that?
Viroqua.
Thank you.
So I taught there 2 years, and I was still looking for a place where the wages were higher. So I got notice of an opening in Barrington, Illinois. And I liked it. The only thing I didn't like about it was, after 2 years, was I was dealing with parents who were earning 10 times more than I was, and families were brought up in a very different kind of experience, background than I had. And I wanted a community that was a little bit more close to my experiences. So I applied at Elgin, and at the time I wasn't told that, I don't recall exactly how it happened, the job would be half-time high school and half-time college.
So it was half-time high school, half-time college?
Yeah.
So some of your classes were
Right.
high school students and some of your classes were college students?
Right.
But then who hired you? So the school district hired you to do...
Well, the school district really was in charge of the college at that time.
Right.
So I spoke to the department chairman in the high school and spoke to Gil Renner, who was the dean of community college, ECC. And they thought I would fit in. I thought I would fit in also. Then after a year at ECC and a year at the high school, Dean Renner asked if I would like to go full-time college. And I thought, yeah, I'd like that very much.
So this was when you were first hired there in 1960, that was really your first experience teaching in teaching college classes.
Right.
Because you had taught high school before, so you had some familiarity with the high school curriculum, although it was, it was probably a little different. But then your college, so after 1 year, Mr. Renner asked you to teach all college classes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what made you say, yes, that's what I want to do?
I think, to be perfectly frank, the schedule was better. The time off was better. I didn't have study halls. And I had the opportunity of teaching students that were a little bit more mature. And I saw the growth of the college coming on down the line. And that was encouraging. And I worked with people in the college. I really had a good department. Blossom, Irma, and Tom, Terry Domsky, all liked what they were doing.
When you first came to the school district, but then I'm thinking about for the college, when you first went full-time for the college, did you have any mentors, people who really took you under their wing and said, come on, Ray, let's help you out?
Not really. All we had was Gil, and Gil was such a lovable guy. He thought a lot about his students. He was very positive. He was the perfect person to get this college going. And everybody worked well with him. One thing we didn't have was instruction on how to be a department chairman. We had to play it by ear, I think. And that went well for a number of years.
Because I was going to ask you about the department chair and the load and the responsibilities that...
Yeah, I had a reduced load of one class. I had 4 classes. They were all comp classes. And one class was for the work of the chairman, whatever that was, and work with students. Quite early, I noticed what I'd known in high school, that students were being passed on from one grade to the other with very little proficiency in English. And that's one of the reasons I moved. I wanted to get away from that. It was almost impossible with the loads we had to do a responsible job at teaching. But I saw the same thing in college. I saw a lot of people that were not ready for college. And that at that time, this was pretty much of an open door, and everybody took the same courses.
This was early in your tenure there?
Pretty early.
60s?
It might have been after a couple of years of teaching that together we decided as a department that we needed to have a course, call it remedial or whatever. And after some experimentation, we decided that we'd call it communication skills, because remedial English was a bad title. And we developed some skills. We learned a lot, I think, that we never thought was necessary to reach a student, to teach a student how to write. That was that we had to teach them how to see. So experimentally, we used films, I think fairly successfully for a while, until I think the students got too dependent on the films and weren't getting as much out of them as originally as they had. But we found in some of the films we played that students were missing details, very important details, and they didn't see how the details combine to produce a theme, an idea, a focus. And we were trying to get them to write in greater detail rather than just excessive generalities. And that was hard to do, so we used the film as one avenue that helped us, until after a while it got to be too much of a thing the students depended on. So I think the remedial English became a very different course than the one I originally taught. I originally taught what was essentially a grammar course, because I could tell that they didn't know enough about sentence structure or grammar. And also, I learned that they hadn't really taught to learn to like to write. You know, when you think back over your high school courses, you had English in junior high, you had your sophomore year, freshman year, all the way through high school. It was just called English, and maybe it was called English, American English, or I can't recall what we had. But there's so much repetition that they got fatigued with the idea of having to take another English course. So we had to come up with different ways of teaching. And at that time, that was an era, I think during the Vietnam War, there was a lot of experimentation and many things. Thereafter, we're all pretty much independent operators. Each had a way of teaching.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the developmental course, and if I could focus on that a little bit, how did the students select, or how were they selected to take a developmental or a communication skills course?
They took ACT courses, and if they, at that time, hadn't reached the score of 17, I believe.
Was 17?
Then they had to do a writing sample. So the writing sample, we learned better. It's best that we have them in class doing the writing sample, because we discovered there's a lot of cheating going on, even for the themes that were being turned in the regular English classes. So it was a supervised hour. I didn't like I thought it was an awful lot of pressure, and we'd give them quite thoughtful questions that they had to deal with, requiring a statement of opinion of some sort, or perhaps on an analytical topic. I don't recall exactly what. Then we had the added duty of reading those bundle of themes and making a judgment on the basis of one theme. And I think that worked out fairly well. It was better than the ACT score. Well, the ACT was good to eliminate many of the students that were really remedial. But writing and grammar are very different things, you know. You can know all the grammar there is, and you may not be able to write. So I think the experimentation was very interesting that we had to do. The hardest part was tremendous load, and I think the last 2 years were saying something to me, you know, better do something else, you know.
Now, your first years, almost the first decade with ECC, you were in a downtown campus.
Right.
And were you in Renner Hall then?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there came a time when the school, the college separated from the public school.
Right.
It was in '65, and then new campus was created in 1971, and you were moved to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you talk about your experiences in the Renner Hall, as in terms of classrooms and being with other faculty, compared to when you moved to the new campus?
I thought we were a family living in that one building, and there was some separation geographically due to all the other courses that were being taught. And I don't recall many meetings with many of the presidents dealing with the college as a whole, other than problems with enrollment. We'd get a report from guidance once a year about how well our students were doing in Northern. Well, we assumed they would do well after a year or two of community college.
So you taught composition courses and you taught literature courses too?
I had a couple of experiences with teaching, yeah, and it was so much better, really. So much more fun, you know.
What courses?
A novels class and a short story class. I think that's all I had. And I willingly accepted a couple of years of teaching just comp because I knew the end of the line was coming, and I wanted to be well prepared in any course I wanted to teach. And I had a lot of other things to do during the summer with a new home and with new property up north and all that. That had become very much a part of my life.
You were involved in the movement toward collective bargaining at the college.
Yeah. We had affiliation with the Illinois Education Association through the high school initially. When I taught in the high school, I was directly involved in the politics and all IEA was dealing with. And that was determined that we would be affiliated with the IEA also. And we were attending meetings along with the public school teachers, IEA-centered meetings. They were still public school oriented, and I think they probably were doing a good job there. So I think I probably recommended that we get some other affiliation. And during this time, I think Gus Stewart maybe already was meeting with Illinois college retirees. I don't know if it was before he retired or after he retired, but at any rate, they were well organized, and they had not struck ever, but they got what they wanted somehow or other. And the people that were running the AFT were really quality people.
So there are two strains that we're talking about here. One is the collective bargaining, and the other is your work after you retired with our local organization of retirees, and the health insurance for entire.
Yeah, the health insurance. I think it was Irma Davis that came to me one day, and both of us were then retired. She did retire, I think, a year before me, something like that. And one of our librarian, Martha Bowling, if you remember Martha, was without insurance other than the college. And now we could have, as retirees, kept the college insurance plan, but it would have been at a very high rate.
Right, you had to pay for it yourself.
Yeah. And it would have been just beyond our ability to pay, I think. So that determined our seriously working in conjunction with city college people. That was their want also, was to get the same coverage as the university people. Because these were all community college people who were meeting with at that time.
The university retirees all had health insurance as retirees.
All paid for. And they still do. We had meetings in Elgin and other colleges, and the group got larger and larger and larger, and everybody saw the need for a college-wide retiree association. Mm-hmm. And that remained to be a very important issue, although increases in pension that was a very important topic too. And we did get some increases. And then finally, the point was reached. I probably had been directly involved in this university college group about 7 years. That was decided that we weren't going to get any more increases. We had legislators attending our annual meetings, and finally one of them said, "You show me the money and we'll get it for you." Most of my newsletters had to deal with just the problem of the need for increase in benefits originally, and then later on getting better insurance. So, but mainly, the other issue was the state not funding us. I mean, that from the year one, it was the problem. And finally, everything hit the fan when the governor, who's now in prison, decided to borrow from the pension system. And then I wrote a pretty outspoken copy of the newsletter and sent it out to the faculty, and let everybody know the president was the governor was no good. It was evident to everybody. But I was very forthright in that one, and I felt I had to be. So it was interesting having that responsibility.
So there came a time close to 1985 when you decided to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us about your decision?
About the decision? It was a very easy one to make. I was yearning for freedom, and we were building the place up north, continuing the construction there, and wanted to spend as much time away during the year to get up there even during the winter time. And I had other ideas. I even took up flying. But a lot of things happened I never anticipated happening. The airplane project ended, death of a dear wife, movement, sale of the house we planned together. It had 30 acres with it. Wow. Nothing to laugh at, but how else do you handle that?
Right. So I think my final question to you, Ray, is can you think about your years at Elgin Community College, your teaching career there, and reflect on it. What might be some of the highs of your involvement at the college?
I think one thing, having a group of really good people who are intellectually able people to work with that maybe I hadn't seen in the high schools. There was a difference. And in spite of the differences we had, Irma was different from me and Tom was different, and the differences mattered, and we learned to live together pretty well, I think. And we had a good department going. That was fun. And working with young people, of course, is always fun. But the theme burden got to be too much. And I realized later on I wasn't doing the job I had originally set out to do. And I could live on pension and had a lot of other things to do. So there comes a time in everybody's life, I guess. Right. So it was done in a positive way. I mean, there's a lot of joy connected with it. I didn't have to, but I wanted to retire.
So your impact, you changed the lives of many, many, many students.
Yeah.
You changed the life of the faculty through your work with the establishment of a faculty association. And you changed the health and welfare. You improved the health and welfare of retirees.
I was really committed to that and was really able to remain committed to it, partly because I was dealing with people that spoke the same language, had the same problem, and what else do you do, you know? It was, and I had someone who stuck with it, Gus Stewart. A lot of others weren't interested, and that was okay. You can't expect everyone to be interested in the same thing.
So for all of those things, we thank you.
Well, I thank you guys and people like you that were doing the work of the college.